Greetings, and good afternoon, Juneteenth family. Welcome to another weekly edition of our Luncheon Room.
E is exhaling, having an opportunity to breathe, to rest, to refill yourself and rejuvenate yourself, because no one can pour from an empty cup.
As you evolve and become more of yourself, you begin to attract the people that are there for you.
Amen.
So everything you need is in this space.
You have to learn from your mistakes. Once you make a mistake, sit down, recoup, and then start over. And once you do that, you say, I got that.
See, Juneteenth means to me, I would definitely say empowerment and education.
When I experienced it, like just coming together and, being a part of something bigger than myself, And
a new start, starting a new chapter, opportunity, new beginnings, all of that.
Greetings, and good afternoon, Juneteenth family. Let's try that one more time. So good to be back here with you guys after a little 2-week hiatus. I'm so happy to be back in the space, doing what we do best, here to talk about things that are impacting, affecting, and happening in our community. Today, we are here to talk about a case. As we know, our communities, our world is in a state of emergency in regards to our rights, in regards to things shifting and changing and being overturned. First, we had Roe versus Wade. We have some states that are allowing different things to happen that are impacting the LGBT community and the services that they'll be able to get. And now this latest one is affirmative action and it being abolished. Today, we're here with our CEO and founder of Juneteenth NY, Athenia Rodney, and she'll be leading us in a conversation about how we will be affected, how our children will be affected, how our community will be affected by the affirmative action decision being overturned. So let's bring Athenia up to the stage. Hey.
I'm good. Hello. I miss you. Hey. Welcome back and happy almost birthday.
Thank you. I really missed you guys too. I missed you. I missed the space. I missed Keisha. I missed the community. I missed being, little did I know, I even missed being right here in front of the camera. And I gotta get used to that feeling, especially in other spaces. So I'm always grateful for this space because this is the one that is learning me and growing me. And and supports me and the rest of everybody else out there that comes to be here with us. So I am honored to be back, and won't be going anywhere. And let's dive in, sis. I know that you have a presentation that you'll be leading, but before we go into that, I would just love for you to share, we know why we're here talking about this today, but you really share what's in your heart, what made you decide for us to have this discussion this week. And then you'll dive into your presentation, and then we'll discuss anything that may come up in the chat or any questions or comments that are there. All right.
Sure. So before we even start, thank you for just opening up in that space. My head is a little crazy. I don't know what's going on with me. But one of the things for why this was an important topic for us to have today, or just in general, when I heard the verdict, I guess is the best way to put it, of the affirmative action being recanted, I don't know, it hit me differently. It hit me in my soul, and I was like, I felt like I definitely was a product in different places, maybe not in college, because the program that I was afforded to go to college with was not an affirmative action program, but it was based on the idea that there needed to be more diversity in the schools. There were people who did attend my school who were based on affirmative action integrations, or so to speak. And I don't even know, it was a lot of conversations on campus. And I've been watching Blackish lately. So it's funny because now, Blackish, or should I say Grownish, not Blackish, Grownish, where it takes place in college and they're having conversations on the campus about different things that are happening. And it just reminded me of the conversations like this that we had on campus, conversations talking about affirmative action and if we were accepted into the college on affirmative action, were we okay with it, and where we stood. And a lot of people, especially people of color, will say, no, I'm not a product of affirmative action. Like, that's not how I got into the school. Like, I worked hard to get into the school. And I always shared with them is because you got into the school on affirmative action doesn't mean that you didn't work hard. It's quite the opposite. It just means that you were given more of a chance. And we'll go through in this presentation and share a little bit more about what affirmative action is, who it affected, and some of the other things that are coming down the line that we need to be aware of. And what I was most privy to was that with this Juneteenth platform, while we take the Juneteenth weekend, Father's Day weekend, to engage in some fun things, the basis of our organization is about education and empowerment. And what are we doing in the education space when things like this come up? And what are we doing in the empowerment space when things like this come up? So I'm going to stop there, but that is really the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, not as a make wrong for anyone, but as an aha moment for us to really understand what this is and how it affects us moving forward. Right now, it's just affecting our schools, our colleges. But soon it will eventually start to trickle down to employment opportunities and where we and other areas of our life. And then where does that leave us? Are we in a position to fight back if we need to? Are we in a position of power where we have savings accounts, where we have property, where we have access to our deeds, and we understand what our redistributions are? We voting? Are we using all of the things that the rights of which our ancestors fought so much for? So I am going to, if you can pull up the presentation, the first thing that we're gonna do is what I thought would be most beneficial is for us to have a educational stance or understanding of what affirmative action is, because I feel like we all don't really know. Like, we've heard the word, we've heard the term, but to really understand what that looks like. Keisha, can you put that up screen, please? And as it's loading for us, I just want you to think about all of the areas where affirmative action or opportunities like this may be present in our lives.
Now, when I was in high school, affirmative action just seemed like some buzzword from back in the day. But when me and my friends actually started applying to college, it was something that came up a lot. Affirmative action is back in the news, and this time, Harvard is getting sued. Now, usually these types of lawsuits make the claim that when race is considered in college admissions, white people are unfairly discriminated against. But this lawsuit is claiming Asian Americans are the ones being hurt by these policies. Plot twist. So while this lawsuit against Harvard has a new angle, it really does boil down to an age-old debate over affirmative action. Should race be a factor in college admissions? Okay, so when it comes to college admissions, affirmative action refers to policies where race and gender are considered in the application process. Now, they're not the only thing that colleges are looking at. They're still looking at your grades, your SAT scores, extracurricular activities, all that good stuff. But they also take into account your race and gender in an effort to help ensure that women and minorities are getting equal access to higher education. The idea was born out of the civil rights movement in the 1960s as a way to help counter the long-standing racist and sexist barriers that kept minorities and women out of elite universities. Barriers like, I don't know, the fact that women couldn't get a degree from Harvard until 1963, or the idea that people of color weren't as smart as white people. The 60s were messed up, man. We needed rules to help. Some see affirmative action as kind of like a counterbalance to legacy admission policies, which is when applicants get preferential treatment if someone in their family attended the school, a perk that tends to benefit wealthy white applicants, since they were the only ones getting into these elite schools in the first place. And to be clear, affirmative action isn't always about race. It's definitely helped a lot of white women, but now that co-ed is kind of the norm, the controversy is almost always over race. And over the years, there's been a stream of lawsuits challenging it, mostly from people who feel they've been unfairly rejected because of race. The most recent being this Harvard case. So let's take a look at both sides of the argument. Those in favor of affirmative action see it as a way to fight long-standing discrimination when it comes to educational opportunities. They think it's necessary in making sure that minorities with good academic standing have access to higher education. And there is some data to support this. 8 states have essentially banned affirmative action practices, and instead have what's known as race-blind admission policies. So, the New York Times looked at admissions data from public universities in a bunch of those states, and they found that when schools got rid of affirmative action, there was a dip in Black and Latino students, even as their populations grew. But it wasn't true for every university and state. In fact, Florida has actually done a pretty good job of keeping its enrollment of Black and Latino students at pace with the population, despite getting rid of affirmative action. Yep, you heard me right. That was Florida, the same Florida that brings you headlines like these. Affirmative action advocates also point out that a more diverse campus benefits everyone, not just the students it's specifically designed to help. With the diverse student body, all students learn valuable interpersonal skills outside of the classroom, like how to interact and respect people that are different from you. Skills that set you up for a successful life in a diverse world. Now, that doesn't mean that being nice to people of color is gonna get you a lot of money, but who knows? And then once you get into the real world, there's evidence that diverse teams make better decisions and are actually even more profitable to businesses. So maybe I was wrong. But if you're on the other side of this argument, you don't see affirmative action that way. Many opponents believe that affirmative action policies are themselves discriminatory and can actually create racial tension. They say that qualified candidates end up getting rejected from schools while less qualified minority applicants get accepted for the sake of diversity. They even have a term for this, reverse discrimination. And at elite schools, less qualified could be the difference between perfect SAT scores and getting one question wrong. And this discrimination is kind of what the Harvard lawsuit is all about. The plaintiffs are essentially claiming that Harvard is holding Asian Americans to a higher standard because they don't want too many getting in compared to other groups. And the argument goes, this can hurt race relations. If people are assuming that minority students are only at a school because they got special treatment, then those students might not be seen as equals in the eyes of their professors and their peers, even if they would have gotten in without affirmative action. And that doesn't exactly create an environment of inclusiveness. Some opponents say that instead of being race-based, affirmative action should be class-based. That way, a student of a single white mom from Appalachia or a low-income Asian immigrant family would get a leg up. Then you're not actively hurting poor whites or Asians. And of course, there are other opponents that think even that's too far and just want college admissions to be based on merit, like looking at your test scores and your GPA. There's also the argument that affirmative action isn't even really working. According to another New York Times analysis, admissions of Black and Latino students is still lacking at many top universities. And instead of focusing efforts on affirmative action policies, some opponents think that we should tackle the problems that both low-income and students of color face early in the education system. Problems like lack of resources or advanced courses. That way, we set students up for success from the beginning. So the debate over affirmative action has been raging for years, and Americans are pretty split on the issue. It brings up some great questions about what we value as a society and how we ensure equality. Now, I know you all have some opinions about this, so should race be a factor in college admissions? Let us know in the comments below. And speaking of college admissions, you should check out this video we did on SATs and ACTs. Or we did a video on algorithms in our justice system if you just want to watch another dope video. As always, I'm your host, Miles Best. And you should like and subscribe to this channel because I liked this episode, so I hope you liked it because it was good. I mean,
thank you. So I just want to start there. There was so many nuggets that he shared and talked about in what affirmative action is and who benefits from it. As you heard, the biggest benefactors of affirmative action were white females. They weren't even African American. So why even fight for something like affirmative action to be in place, right? So one of the things that came up for me was affirmative action also helps to level the playing field. So I just want you to think about it in this way, right? Because I went to a predominantly white college, and one of the things that I ended up doing is being a part of the admissions, helping with admissions. I wanted to learn what the admissions process was, what it looked like on the other end, what the process, how people got into the school and like what mattered. So I would look at what the numbers, the scores that people would get based on certain things. And my school was one of those race-blind admissions spaces, right? But they were programs that brought in more people from diverse communities. So from New York City, which is considered to be more diverse, or from Chicago or California or things of that nature. However, there are schools who basically what they would do is they'll have one pile who, let's say, if there are 200 students that are going into the school, there'll be 150 of those students will be white students, and then 50 would be people of color. And that would be a range. So people of color would include African Americans, Asians, people from other countries, like that would be that pile, that would be stockpiled together. So 50 would be that, and then 150 would be the other. And basically that 50 would have to compete to be at the top of that class, while the 150 on the other side would be able to compete on the other side. So that just to kind of give you some framework of what that might look like. Let's get into this. We recently just are on the heels of 4th of July. And for some of us, Juneteenth is our new 4th of July. That is what we've been dispersing. I know even on my personal page, I shared like happy 15th day after Juneteenth, because Juneteenth was the time that we officially were celebrating our emancipation. When America celebrated their independence, that wasn't the same for us. And Frederick Douglass gave a keynote address right after Independence Day that talked about this. It was delivered in Rochester, New York in 1852. And just so that you know a little bit about Frederick Douglass, he was an abolitionist who had escaped enslavement in 1838. So like he was one of those guys that you didn't mess with. He was smart as all heck. And he basically, if you know anything about that time, what I've been researching, what I've been learning is that people had to connect to organizations in order to get advancement, in order, to build camaraderie. That's where you get the Black Panthers and all of these other organizations. It was a necessity for survival. So he went and he did a speech titled, What to the Slave is the 4th of July? And if you go to the next slide, it really impresses, he talks about some of the things that impress upon Now, to give context, this was 76 years after America had experienced their independence. Abraham Lincoln was still a lobbyist for the Illinois Central Railroad, which later was elected into office and then assassinated because of his efforts towards abolishing slavery. About half of the states still allowed slavery at this time. And this is what Douglas' famous lines were. If you go to the next slide. The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence, bequeathed by your fathers, is shared by you, not me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours. It is not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. And I definitely would like to hear if there's anybody in the community that has any thoughts or what they thought he was saying here. But I'll just share shortly. What he was basically talking about was not everyone was free. Like a lot of us African Americans was still being seen as 3/5 of a man. Like and even when we were given that opportunity, it was not for our own rights, but so that we could help to be counted in that state, so that that state could get more voting rights. It wasn't about us. It really wasn't about us. And so to think about when the gentleman was talking, he was talking about like blacks, not being as smart as whites. And it's like, not for nothing. In order for us to have survived as far as we have, we've had to be smart. And we've had to be smart because we had to take what we were given, the little bits of freedom, the little bits of justice, the little bits of liberty and prosperity and independence, and we had to create happiness for ourselves, for our families, for our community, for our churches, and we continue to do that, and we continue to still find ways to rejoice despite the disparities, despite our brothers and sisters that are still being killed and being hung and being murdered senselessly by people who are put in place to protect us. And again, not all people are in that space, but there are still some. If you can go to the next slide, please. So Douglas's speech at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, he did another one, and that speech was titled "What the Black." This was another speech that he again went to another organization, another group, and spoke about. And this one was delivered in Boston in 1865. Now this one was just before the Civil War ended, which is where we were allowed to start voting, discussing the importance of voting rights for Black people. He talked about encouraging attendees to redirect their organization's energy towards voting rights. So this was that time. So this is 1865. Again, this is 100 years before our emancipation before we were even, like, our rights were even happening. Like, we were still fighting in 1965. Like, we were still fighting for our rights, for everyone to be able to vote. And so when we talk about go out and vote and make a decision, our ancestors fought for us to have this power, and we take it for granted. We don't take advantage of the rights that are given to us, or that not even given to us, that we're fought for to be in that space. And we can go on to the next, and I don't know if there are any comments. Yeah, no? Okay. So talking about the vote, a lot of things that we do or that we talk about right now has been in a space of just shouting. Like, we do a lot of like complaining, I feel. In our community, we are talking about like what's wrong. And what I want us to do is to take the next stance, which is agency, right? What are we doing with our right to vote? Douglas believed that it was necessary to secure voting rights for Black people. Like, he took a strong stance on that. And there's a stance that we take on that as well. Like, at all of our Juneteenth events, we've had the opportunity for people to sign up to vote, from young to old. And it's funny because we partnered with the organization this year, the Drivers Cooperative. And what I learned from them was that they have a contract to help people to get out to go and vote during election season, right? And most of the people who end up in their cars are senior citizens. So the people who are going out to vote are the ones who were fighting for the privilege to go out and vote. And those of us that are young, we are not going out to vote. And the question is why? Like, why are we feeling like our vote does not matter? Our vote absolutely does matter. We speak in numbers, but when we're not signing up, we're not speaking to our children and explaining to them what the urgency or the agency of voting is all about. Or when we talk about, oh, well, our vote doesn't matter or doesn't count. It does. Every bit of what we do matters, because we are a community of people who can make decisions if we do it together. It's not always going to be the same vote. We always don't believe on the same things. Trust me, especially within the Juneteenth world. There's a whole lot of infighting about what Juneteenth means, what it should mean across all of the different states. And that's why God gave us all individual purposes. But there are spaces where we can work together. And I think that this is definitely one. And one of them is making sure that we are all able to vote, and all going out to vote when the opportunity presents itself. Next slide, please. So the passage of the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, which gave Black men the right to vote. It did not give women at this time the right to vote. So we're, again, another level of being a Black female is a second tier, or intersectionality is what we call it, where it hurt, right? So it was like, okay, let's push our men to go out and vote. And then what started to happen? They sent our men off to war to go fight. So guess what? Our men weren't there and we weren't able to vote. So then essentially we had no vote. It would take nearly a century for the voting rights of 1965 to bring real protections to ensure people could exercise their right to vote. And even today, and we'll talk about this, there are spaces where governments are doing at all costs to prevent Black voters from getting to the voting. And again, like I said, we in certain spaces like New York, we have free reign. Like, we have multiple spaces, multiple areas where we're able to go and vote, different time frames we're being allowed to go and vote. All of those things are being afforded to us, and we're not taking advantage of it. We're like, oh, I'll go do it later, and then later never happens and it becomes something else. So when the opportunity for voting becomes available to you, again, go out and do it, because this was something that we didn't have a couple of years ago. Literally, like, this is 1965. Like, my mother, like, yeah, like, that's when my mother, well, she's not 1965, but she was born in the 50s. But this is my mother's timeline. Like, this is my grandmother's timeline. Like, this was like yesterday. So, like, this is not far from us. We're only the next generation. You can go to the next slide, please. So to fast forward back to the affirmative action and kind of how this falls into us, right? So affirmative action was signed into law by President Kennedy in 1961. Again, not very far from where we are today. Affirmative action seeks to level the playing field for historically marginalized groups. The idea was that this was a they weren't going to give us our 40 acres and a mule, or they did not have an idea of how they could, but they were like, hey, we can give you the opportunity to go to college and create your own level of success. And we took it. We were like, okay, that's fine. We're going to go with that. We're going to, go to college. We're going to try to get as much people educated so we can buy houses, get good jobs, make good money, and start our own communities. In 2023, affirmative action was outlawed in college admissions by the Supreme Court. That's now. So again, where do we see ourselves from where things were in 1961, where it was created, to 2023, where it is now? Next slide, please. So the myth of a race-neutral America. Part of the reasons why they shared that affirmative action is no longer necessary is because we are a race-neutral America. There are, when I look at this, I just laugh because there are so many things. When we were trying to get a house, for example, like there were things that would come up that I'm like, really? Like that really would only, like, one of the questions were, do we have a dowry or funding from our parents to support in addition if we ever defaulted on our mortgage? That's not everyone's, like, that's not a space where everyone has that ability. Unfortunately, but fortunately, we had to fight to create this space for ourselves. And so many people have that situation. Not everyone is given the opportunity to be passed down property or to be given, I've been in spaces and circles where my friends, they were able to send their kids to school and from kindergarten. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. I want to send my kids to private school. And then when I had a child, and I'm like, okay, let me look into these private schools. And they're like $35,000 and $40,000 a year. And I'm like, that's college tuition. So I'm going to be paying college tuition from kindergarten through college. That's a little difficult. I'm still trying to work on getting the money together for them in college. And then some people will say, well, why have kids if you can't afford them? And it's like, why not have kids? Why not continue? To me, to say, why have kids if you can't afford them is the same space of I shouldn't have kids, so I shouldn't continue my legacy. I shouldn't continue to have a child who might come into this world and be the next person that might find the next new invention that could help save the country, the world, who could be the next scientist and all of those things. So who are you to say to me, don't have children unless you can afford them? My family didn't have the money all the time to afford us as kids, and my aunts and stuff like that. During COVID, we had meetings and we would learn about, how family got together. And it'll be 20 something people in the house, and one person to be cooking and one person to be watching the other. And, as all the parents went to work, like, we made it happen. So to say that to me meant that you believe in what the only American dream is. And that is to have a picket white fence and to have, 2.5 kids and a dog and all of those things. And that is not everybody's story. So to talk about socioeconomic gaps being erased or not being present when it comes to races is just simply untrue. You can go to the next slide. So so there's something called a partisan gerrymandering, is when politicians redraw district boundaries to benefit their own political parties. And this has happened a lot in New York, and especially in Brooklyn. In the East New York, Williamsburg, Brownsville, I forget what the other area is called now, but they have redrawn the lines over the last 15 years at least 7 or 8 times. And community members have gotten together and we've talked about not having that happen. But when you look at how the lines are drawn, it's continuing to, again, redraw districts based on where potential funding or potential monies are going to be had, and to take certain people, or mostly minority people, out of being able to claim a certain district or a certain area. Also with elected officials being able to manage into certain areas. So last year, the GOP presidential candidates, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, created an election police force that harassed Black voters. They didn't allow them to vote. They prevented them to vote. They, again, when I talk about this redistributing of the district laws, that's why when we say you're going out to vote, make sure you know what your district, where your voting district is, because one year it might be in one place and then another year it might be in another. And you might get discouraged because it might be 2 or 3 or 5 miles away apart from one another. And they want you to do that. Like, they want that to happen. And GOP lawmakers in North Carolina discouraged Black voters with almost surgical precision, according to a judge in 2016. So again, this was happening in North Carolina, this is happening in Florida, and in other areas, other cities, and other states as well, that are continuing to impact us. Because, and we'll talk a little bit later about what's going on in Florida and some of the rulings that they have there, but there are so many things that are really hurting our Black community. The next slide, please. So what's still happening? Lawsuits alleging fraud in 2020. So this was during the Trump administration, where he is still trying to say that there was election fraud and trying to get that election recounted. And it's like, bro, like, we're already in another election, like, let it go. But we're not, that's something that we're going to continue to keep fighting. So if just to think that was something that is still on the books and is still ongoing, that when we go into election year for presidential election next year, to be mindful of those same areas, that there were issues, that they don't happen again. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas signed a congressional map with 0 Black districts, despite Texas having the largest Black population in the country. How odd. The fight for equity and justice continues in so many different things. In our education, at the top of the meeting, Jamie talked about in our Roe versus Wade and our education rights, and talking about our sexual reproduction rights. And we are continuing to move into different areas, whether it be our finances, our health. It's going to continue to come down the line if we don't pay attention to it. Next slide, please. So in my research and trying to find out more about like what's happening in Florida, I learned of this act that I guess it came about last year. It's called the Stop Woke Act. When I tell you, I understand, well, I mean, another one of those things that evokes so much strife in my spirit, that I was like, I'm so ready to just boycott Florida. Like, my brother lives down there, but I'm like, bro, I don't think I'm gonna come down there for a little while, because Florida's not gonna see my money. Like, orange juice, which is out of Florida, like, y'all not gonna see my money. Because we need to do more of this voting with our money, and doing more of a direct act to states and to areas that are directly affecting us. Because what has happened in Florida is slowly but surely trickling down. So the Stop Woke Act is the Individual Freedom Act, commonly known as the Stop Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees. It's called the Woke Act. Stop wrongs to our kids and our employees. Now, this includes teaching our children about their history, because it makes, if you look at the second one, it prohibits instruction that individuals share responsibility for others' past actions by virtue of their race, sex, or national origin. So basically, this is saying that if you live in Florida, that I cannot talk to you about slavery and how it was affected, because I don't want to make another white person who was not a direct person, a direct slave owner, feel bad about slavery. But it's okay for us to continually be to feel bad that our ancestors were enslaved. How does that work? How does that allow, how is that allowed to continue? And this was allowed to be signed by Governor Ron DeSantis in April of 2022. And it went into effect July of the same year. So there are laws like this that are being enacted in different communities. Like I said, it is starting to make its way. I am in Georgia now. And I went to a president for the PTA organization. And one of the things that came up during our PTA conference was the word of equity and inclusion being removed from our language in the schools. That because if we say equity, it makes white people feel bad because they are their rights are being stripped from them, because we're saying that we need to create a space of equity. All equity means is that we're giving everyone an equal opportunity to have the same measures of advancement. It's not taking anything away from someone else. And I wish I would have put this up here, but one of the, there's if you Google like equity, like an equity picture, there's a picture that you usually see. It's like one tall person, it's like one like medium-sized person, one short like a kid, and then one person in a wheelchair. And there's like a wall that is there. And they're like, so this is what equity looks like. You have the tall person, and it's like maybe a show or performance or something going on. So you have the tall person who's able to see over the wall with no problem, right? That is what we consider to be the white person, the person who has all kinds of resources. They have all funding, anything that they might have needed growing up that they have been able to get, right? That's that first person. The second one is like they're right under them, so they can barely see. They got a tippy toe to see over this wall, but they're barely reaching. If they, they get tired, they're gonna fall back. So it's like, oh, you gotta always stay on guard. Like that's that person. You always gotta stay on guard. Oh, there you go. You always gotta stay on guard. And then you have the person who is who's in a wheelchair, right? They're at the bottom. They don't have the option to pull themselves up or to try to get to the top. They just have to sit where they are and be. So this is what equality looks like when we're talking about when we're talking in that space, versus equity where there's a ramp given to the person who is in a wheelchair so that he has access to be able to see the same, and the person that was short is given some stacks that they can stand on so that they can see over the wall. The other one that I've also saw is just removing the barrier altogether and just saying, well, instead of saying, we're gonna to have SAT scores, which some schools have done, some colleges have done that. They've removed the barrier of SATs because there's so many things with SATs that are wrong, and just are inviting people to come into the schools based on their merits, other things that they're doing. What are they involved in their community? What are their beliefs? What do they think about life? What are they trying to do? What is their focus? And to me, that's what I feel like college should be about, bringing people together with focuses that can, people who can learn from each other, who have experienced different things in life, who have learned experiences, who can bring that to the table so that everyone is able to walk away from that community a more well-versed person. And I'm going to stop there. So I'll bring you back on, Jamie. Definitely want to chat it up with you a little bit and about what we were talking about. I don't know. We still can't hear you. At least I can't hear you. I can't hear you. It's one of those days. We've been having technical difficulties all day. So we thank you for bearing with us and we appreciate you for sure. But if you have any comments, also definitely put it in the chat. Can you hear? I think Jamie's trying to re-log in. But definitely want to hear from the community. Talk to me about some ideas, some thoughts, what of your views. Let's see, Jamie's back. Can we hear you? Nope. Aw. Oh no, we can't hear you. Is the speaker connected? You may have to chat it. Okay. Well, when she comes back, well, like I said, I mean, even if Jamie's not able to come back, I really wanted to set the stage. My little piece of hair is doing its own thing. To kind of have conversations and really just open the floor, and we're going to share this out to the community so we can continue to have these conversations. I think we're also one of my fellow Juneteenth organizations out in Queens. They put together an emergency town hall, I think on Saturday. I think I hear you, Jamie.
All right, you can hear me now.
Yay, we can hear you now. Awesome.
Okay.
I was saying,
I was working out the phone. But you have to go on the phone. So I was saying before, what I was trying to say is that there's like so much to unpack in this conversation, so many things that came up for me. I guess the biggest thing that that struck me, and I think that annoys me about this conversation, is this constant tit for tat in having to how I feel. Like, come on, y'all, please stop it. It just be honest, even when it comes down to the conversation about the PTA and the decisions that they want to make there and things that they want to remove. It's reminded me of all of these books that I was forced to read in high school that are now being pulled away from us, that were part of the core of, as much as I didn't want to read them at the time because I wanted to read more like Judy Blume things and stuff like that. It helped build who I am as a young, look at me still declaring to be a young woman out in this world. About to be a whole 47 on Monday, and I'm still young in my mind and heart. But yes, I am. And it helped build who I am today. Many of this literature that they want to now pull. So the conversation of just like equity, equality, it's just a really, really, really frustrating one. Even when it comes down to just male and female relations in this country, the amounts that we get paid, just the whole entire conversation is almost and I've heard the young folks kind of allude to this before, and I'm always like, but how does that work? And right now they're actually starting to do it for us, and it's throw the whole system away. Throw the whole system away and start from scratch. And that's what, to me, with these different opportunities, it just means that for those involved in politics and doing the actual advocacy work, and the ones that are out there beating the pavement in these areas, have a lot more work on their hands now, in having to create something new and then actually hope and do the work to get that passed. So those are the things that come up for me. It's like, just fine, because even in some of those instances, when you end up finding out that the statistics of a white woman having more affordance from affirmative action than us, it's like, well, like you said, what are we really fighting for? And none of it has really worked. It's worked for some folks. It has afforded some of us to do the things that they needed to do to yes, use it for themselves, but as for the masses, for how many of us it is in this country, no, it hasn't done what it was intended to do when it was put in place. Because like most things, it's been manipulated and used and abused. So here we are today. in another great fight. And I was told by a young woman that I met recently. She's an amazing writer, she's part of trying to change what media looks like for our folks and what she's contributing to the world. And she just shared that she was happy that we were having this conversation, and that this conversation needs to be out there more, and that she was just grateful for that. So I'm really glad that you chose to talk about this today. And I hope that I always hope that all of our sessions go viral, or that one of them goes viral one day. But this one right here definitely needs to be being highlighted in places and spaces, because it's definitely a conversation that's bigger than affirmative action. It's the conversation that you started out with, which is what our goals are: empowerment and education. And I'm sure that there were a lot of facts that were shared in this about affirmative action. There were many that I didn't know. You know that I've heard of it. I didn't go away to school, so it never really applied to me anyway. So it was kind of one of those things that was for us, but just over there in my mind. So again, really, really, really grateful to be here in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for even sharing that. I mean, there are so many things that I feel like we do take for granted overall, just as as a generation, we don't think about, because we're like, it doesn't apply to us. And even, like I said, even when I went to college, I wasn't there on an affirmative action basis. So I was like, oh, it doesn't apply to me. But people thought that it did. Like, people, because I was Black and I was at a predominantly white school, they were like, oh, you're here on affirmative action. And I'm like, no, I'm here on a leadership scholarship because I've done things in my community and that the school sought to be noteworthy. And I'm here and I'm still doing those things. And I'm graduated and I'm still doing those things. I'm still leading in those same capacities in which I was in high school. So that didn't change. And it's like, there are things that we can look at people and like, you look at a child or look at a young person, like, you're going somewhere, like you can tell. And it's, organizations like the Posse program and other scholarship opportunities that are not based on affirmative action or on color, but based on what you do in your community, how you show up, who you are when you show up. And you talked about one of the things I didn't go deep into, but it's like I said, this affirmative action is one space that is hitting our colleges, but the next space after college is employment. And we just got a whole slew of positions that opened up in these these 500, Fortune 500 companies, that's called DEI, diversity and inclusion. To have conversations in these predominantly white, affluential spaces, right? So that Black people, not just Black people, but Latino, Asian, LGBTQIA+, are all able to feel comfortable in spaces that were not traditionally created for them. So how is that going to affect that? Because that's the next thing that's going to go into effect, right? Because they're going to like, oh, well, the schools don't have to do it and they're, fighting in that space. So the next space is going to be these DEIs. And we just, like I said, a whole slew of funds have been created to put towards DEI. A lot of even fundings for a lot of events, activations that happen in the world, concerts, like all of these things that we, it's like we don't see and understand how the money in these spaces go a long way. But we're going to be affected at the end of the day. And go ahead, Jamie.
So, that perfect that you went there, because that's one of the things that came up for me. And I know we haven't had our debriefing from the Juneteenth year and the work that we do in the space and the information. But one of the things that had come up for me over these last months and seeing just the change in sponsorship and what came across and what didn't, as opposed to last year, what's really been sticking out for me the most this year is like, in 2020, we had a major loss that created this ripple, seeing that man for that 8 minutes, it did something to our country. It did something to us. We kicked up, we leveled up in that fight back. the world then responded with this, okay, we're gonna do these things, and it's like so many other things. The minute the media is off of it, the minute that it's no longer this raging conversation, everything is starting to diminish around it. The support, the showing up, the booking of sessions, the wanting to bring education to spaces, it's starting to fizzle down. And to me, that's where even this conversation of what you're talking about, we already started to see the ripple effects. It's almost like from that uprise, we've now created this resistance and pushback that is now starting to show up in other places and spaces. Like, oh, so you guys want to fight and you're getting these DI, what did you say the acronym is for?
Diversity, inclusion.
So these DI groups, we're getting different organizations that are now in place to kind of keep that going, but it's still like this huge resistance. And where can it show up bigger than that top court that really makes these decisions for us in this country? And it's a little scary. It's a little scary. And I know that a lot of us are still so busy living our daily lives that we don't really look at what this could look like really in the future. This is just one thing amongst many others that have already changed and that will continue to change. And as these states, one by one, the states like Florida that are, and the other states that are creating these crazy laws or that are removing laws or putting in new laws, we're in a state of emergency. And that's all I'll say for our people, for this country, for the race relations in this country, for peace, for nonviolence. We're in a state of emergency because this is like the pot simmering. It hasn't boiled over yet, and I'm not looking forward to that day, and I hope that we can contain it so that it doesn't boil over out of the pot, but we are right now simmering.
Yeah, I definitely agree about the simmering. The thing is, the pot has been on simmering for a long time, and we operate in the space of reaction and not in forethought and planning. All of this stuff has been planned, like Trump getting in office, Trump creating putting together a judicial board of lifelongers. Like, do you understand what that means? That means that these people this SCOTUS, who created this ruling against affirmative action, they're lifelongers, which means the only way that they're leaving is if they do a completely heinous act, they die, or they decide to leave, and they're not deciding to leave anytime soon. They just got in office. So that means there are, and when I thought it was interesting about the whole woke act that Florida has, and I'm like, we need to be more woke, people, because there are laws in a lot of states that were never changed. Like, the laws are still there. Like these sundown states, if y'all don't know what that means, like, go and look it up. Like, there are states, there are cities, counties that we're living in that means if you go into that city after hours, they have the right to torture you, to hang you, to kill you because you're black. That's it. No other reason, not because you stole anything, you did anything wrong or anything like that, just because you're black. And there was never a law to cancel that. So all they need to do is say, oh, we want to reenact this law, or we want to, and that's what's happening across America. There are laws that were in place that were never changed after slavery, that were just overlooked. And they've continued to be overlooked over time. And right now, people are taking a fine-tooth comb and they're re-looking into them. And they're like, hey, we can put these people up on this, or we can reenact slavery in this way, or we can do all of, and that's, again, what are we doing as a community to stop these things from happening? So I just want to leave, this was the education part. The next part is the empowerment. What are we going to do moving forward so that we can make a change? Like I said, maybe it's voting without money. Florida is the #1 vacation state. I'm an event planner as well as a travel agent. And now when people are like, oh, I want to go to Florida, the first thing I'm saying is, maybe you should look at some other places. Here are some other great states that you might want to go and visit that are also, just as good, just to get away from Florida, because we sitting there, we're giving them our money and they're making decisions that are taken away from us. So just think about what we're doing, where our money is going, and how we want to move forward. And thank you for having me. Love you.
Love you more. Thank you for being with us today. All right, everyone. I hope that you were able to take some gems away from this conversation, and that it just sparked some level of fire in you, that you will do your part, whether it's just in sharing this video or just being a part of the conversation. But definitely, please go out and vote. Voting. I can't express how important it is that we make sure that these seats, while we don't have control over SCOTUS, we do have control over other areas in different departments and offices. So thank you for being with us this week. And next week's guest is Carissa McEwen. And she'll be here to talk to us about how she transitioned into holistic health and how she uses it to help others learn on their wellness journey. So thank you for being with us. I look forward to seeing you next week, and have a great day and enjoy your weekend. And Monday's my birthday, so feel free to send out a little birthday love and say hey, and like, subscribe, and follow all pages. Have a great day. Bye. Greetings, and good afternoon, Juneteenth family. Welcome to another weekly edition of our Luncheon Learn.
E is exhaling, having an opportunity to breathe, to rest, to refill yourself and rejuvenate yourself, because no one can pour from an empty cup.
As you evolve and become more of yourself, you begin to attract the people that are there for you.
Amen.
So everything you need is in this space.
You have to learn from your mistakes. Once you make a mistake, sit down, recoup, and then start over. And once you do that, you say, I got that.
See, Juneteenth means to me, I would definitely say empowerment and education.
When I experienced it, like just coming together and, being a part of something bigger than myself, and
A new start, starting a new chapter, opportunity, new beginnings, all of